Ms. Marsh. A word one. Here is fine. There's a story going around about you. Playing surgeon in my bay, tying vessels, directing my residents. Who are you? And what were your hands doing inside my patient?
I was keeping him from dying. Your resident lost a deep vessel.
Excuse me? 90 seconds from arrest.
I clamped it.
A nurse does not put her hands in my patient.
A nurse doesn't. But I wasn't a nurse when I learned how.
The room had gone the particular kind of quiet that only happens when people are afraid. Monitors shrieking, alarms stacking on alarms, and yet the human beings inside that trauma bay had gone still because the man on the table was dying and nobody's hands were fast enough. The wound came up through the packing faster than they could lay it down. The chief resident's voice cracked on an order he'd given twice, and in the corner, forgotten, holding a bag of saline she'd been told to hang, stood the new night nurse, the quiet one, the one they'd hired 3 weeks ago and already stopped noticing. Then her eyes went to the wound, not the monitors, the wound, and her free hand, without permission, without a single wasted motion, reached for the suture tray. One knot, that was all it would take. One knot, and she would give herself away. Her name was Quinn Marsh, and for 3 weeks she had been very good at being no one. She worked nights on the trauma floor of a level 1 center on the north side of San Antonio, the kind of place where the helicopters never fully stopped and the coffee was always burned. She clocked in at 7 and clocked out at 7, and in between she hung fluids, charted vitals, turned patients so their skin wouldn't break down, and answered call lights with a patience that some of the older nurses mistook for slowness. She was 39. She wore her hair pulled back plain. She had a soft, unremarkable face and a body the scrubs didn't flatter. And when the surgeons swept through on their rounds, they looked past her the way you look past a coat rack. She let them. That was the whole point of Quinn Marsh. She had built this quiet life on purpose, board by board, the way you'd build a fence to keep something in. They called her the kitchen nurse behind her back, and once nearly to her face, because on her second night, a resident had asked, half joking, where a girl like her had learned to move so quiet around a bedside, and she'd smiled and said, "Kitchen thing. My mother didn't like noise." It wasn't a lie exactly. Her mother hadn't liked noise, but it wasn't where she'd learned it either. She'd learned to move quiet in places she never talked about, over bodies she still saw when she closed her eyes. The man on the table that night was named on his chart as a John Doe, brought in off a single vehicle wreck out on the interstate. No wallet, no ring, a duffel in the ambulance bay with a folded flag patch sewn inside the lid. But Quinn had seen his forearms when they cut the sleeves. She'd seen the old scar tissue and the way the muscles sat, and she'd known before anyone said a word that he was a soldier and not a soft one. The body keeps its own service record. You only have to know how to read it. For 20 minutes, she had done exactly what she was told and nothing more. Hung the bag, held the leg, handed up gauze. She'd watched the chief resident, a bright young man named Dale Priya, do everything by the book and watched the book fail him because the bleeder was deep and awkward and the field kept filling, and the more it filled, the faster he worked, and the faster he worked, the sloppier his hands got. And she knew with the sick certainty of someone who had been exactly where he was standing, that in 90 seconds this man was going to arrest, and they were going to lose him on a Tuesday for no reason at all. And she thought about her fence, all those careful boards, 3 weeks of being no one. Then the monitor gave that long falling tone, and the man's chest went slack, and Priya said a word under his breath that wasn't an order, and Quinn Marsh stopped being no one. "Move your hand," she said. He didn't. People don't when a stranger speaks out of turn. So she stepped in beside him, and she put 2 fingers into the wound where the packing was, and she felt for the vessel the way you'd feel for a heartbeat in the dark, and she found the torn edge of it slick and retracting, and she pinched it closed between her fingers before her own mind had finished deciding to. "Clamp," she said. "Now, the mosquito, not the big one." Something in her voice was different. It had dropped an octave and lost every soft edge she'd sanded onto it, and the surgical tech, running on nothing but training, slapped the instrument into her open palm before she'd even registered whose palm it was. Quinn clamped the vessel. The field stopped filling. For 1 second, nobody breathed. "Suture," she said. 4-0, and somebody bag him. Priya finally moved, because a person who has been drowning will grab any rope. They bagged the patient. Quinn worked. And here is the thing the whole room would talk about for weeks afterward, the thing that would travel up the elevators and down the halls until it reached ears it was never meant to reach. She tied the vessel off left-handed, two-handed, without looking. She wasn't watching her fingers. She was watching his face, his color, the vein in his neck. Her hands did the knot on their own, down in the red, a field tie thrown blind under load. The kind of knot you learn in a place where the lights might go out, and the ground might come up, and you might have 4 seconds before the next thing tries to kill you both. It was not a knot they taught in nursing school. It was barely a knot they taught in residency. It was a battlefield knot, thrown by someone whose hands had done it 10,000 times, when the 10,000th time meant a man went home to his kids. The bleeding stopped. The monitor climbed back up out of the pit. The man on the table was going to live to be angry at his truck another day. And Quinn Marsh looked up and saw 11 people staring at her and understood that the fence was down. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She stepped back, wiped her gloves, and said, in the soft voice again, the kitchen voice, "Dr. Priya had it. I just held pressure." And she picked up the saline bag she'd dropped, and she hung it, and she left the room before anyone could ask her the question forming on all of their faces at once. Because the question was, "Who are you?" And she had spent 7 years making sure nobody ever asked it. She did not sleep that day. She lay in the little rented house near the base with the blinds down against the Texas light, and she stared at the ceiling, and she made the same bargains with herself she'd been making for years. It was a fluke, muscle memory. Nobody would think anything of it. Nurses know things. Nurses save people all the time and get no credit for it. By tomorrow, the story would be that Dr. Priya pulled off a save, and that was fine. That was better. That was exactly how she wanted it. But she kept seeing the man's forearms, the old scars, the service written in the muscle, and she kept feeling, in her own 2 fingers, the memory of 100 other men she'd held together with her hands, in tents that smelled of dust and iodine and fear. She'd been a combat surgeon, a good one, better than good, though she'd cut that word out of herself along with everything else. 2 tours, then a third that she never spoke of, the one where the helicopters didn't come and the roof came down, and she'd worked for 9 hours by headlamp with a nurse and a chaplain, and had saved everyone she could reach and lost the 2 she couldn't, and had walked out at dawn and, some months later, quietly, without drama, without a scene, resigned her commission and let the whole thing fall off her like a coat she was too tired to keep carrying. She'd told the discharge board she wanted a quieter life. That was true. She hadn't told them the rest, which was that she no longer trusted herself to be the person the good ones needed her to be. She'd used up something. She didn't have a name for it. She only knew that when she reached for it now, in the deepest place, she found a kind of ringing silence, and she had decided a silent person had no business holding a scalpel over anyone's beating heart. So she'd become a nurse, retrained from the ground up under her mother's maiden name, in a city big enough to lose herself in, and she'd built her quiet fence, and for 3 weeks she had lived inside it, in peace. Now a man with a field tie forearm was 2 floors above her sleeping off a save, and her hands remembered the knot, and somewhere in the building the story was already walking. The man's name, it turned out, was Sergeant First Class Miguel Reyes, and by the second night he was awake enough to be a problem. Quinn wasn't assigned to him. She'd made sure of that, traded 3 call rooms and a lunch to keep herself down the far hall. But the trauma floor is small at 3 in the morning, and a call light is a call light, and when his went off and no one else answered, she went, because leaving a light unanswered was a thing she was constitutionally unable to do. He was sitting up in the dark, sweating, the sheet twisted around his fists, and she knew that look too. She'd worn it herself. "You don't have to turn on the light," she said quietly from the doorway. He didn't. They sat in the gray glow of the monitor for a while, and she checked his lines by feel and refilled his water, and stood the kind of steady still that she'd learned in the tents. The stillness that tells a frightened animal the predator has left the field. They said a nurse did it, he said eventually. His voice was sandpaper. In the room, when I went out. You had a good team. They said the nurse tied me off left-handed, blind. He turned his head and looked at her, really looked, the way soldiers look, cataloging. You're left-handed. I watched you fill my water. Quinn said nothing. Where'd you serve? He said. Not a question, a password. And she wanted, God, she wanted to say it. Some old muscle in her chest strained toward it like a hand toward warmth. Instead, she smoothed the blanket at the foot of his bed and said, Get some rest, Sergeant. You've got a long road. She was almost to the door when he said, Lo, thank you for my life, ma'am. Whoever you are. She stopped. She didn't turn around. She said, Good night, and she went out into the hall and stood against the cool cinder block wall and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. Being thanked was the hardest thing. Being thanked meant being seen, and being seen was the exact thing the fence was for. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, checking her far hall rooms in the small hours, was that 2 floors up, in the surgical step-down unit, an old man had come to San Antonio to sit beside a dying friend, and that old man had ears, and the story was walking toward him even then. His name was Colonel Raymond Halstead, retired, and he had commanded a forward surgical team for 11 years in 3 countries. He was in the hospital because his oldest friend, a man he'd carried out of a burning vehicle in 1991, was 3 days from the end of a long illness, and Halstead had flown in to be there when it came, because that was the kind of man he was. He'd spent 40 years learning the one lesson the Army teaches best, which is that you show up. He was a spare, upright man of 70, with a white mustache and hands that were still steady, and he did not miss things. He'd been sitting with his friend when a nurse and an aide came in to turn the patient in the next bed, and he'd half listened to their talk the way you do, and then he'd stopped half listening and started listening all the way, because one of them had said the words two-handed and left-handed and blind. Threw it down in the field without even looking at her hands, the aide was saying. Priya said he's never seen anything like it, said she moved like she'd done it 1,000 times, and then she just went back to hanging bags. Wouldn't take any credit, said the doctor had it. Which nurse? Halstead said. They looked at him, surprised the old man in the chair had spoken. New one, the aide said. Marsh, nights, quiet type. Halstead sat very still. Outside the window, the city was going gold at the edges with dawn. He was thinking about a technique, not a knot exactly, a way of throwing a knot, two-handed underload, left dominant, eyes up on the patient instead of down on the field, that he had seen in his whole career from exactly one set of hands. He had watched those hands work for 9 hours by headlamp in a collapsed aid station in a place he wasn't supposed to name, and he had put those hands up for a decoration they'd never fully answered for. And then those hands had vanished out of the service and out of his life, and he had spent a long time wondering what had happened to them. Marsh, he said to himself, not the name he remembered, but names were the easiest thing in the world to change, and he of all people knew why a person might. Sir, the aide said. Nothing, Halstead said. Thank you. And he turned back to his dying friend and took the man's cool hand, but his mind stayed on the quiet nurse 2 floors down, and a certainty settled into him, slow and heavy and sure, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a still pond. He knew those hands. The trouble with a story that walks is that it walks in every direction, and not everyone it reaches wishes the teller well. The chief of surgery was a man named Gregory Vane, and he had built his whole life, like Quinn, on a version of himself he wanted the world to believe. Except where hers was made of hiding, his was made of being seen. He had a corner office, and a name on 3 papers, and a habit of arriving late to the good saves, and early to the good cameras. He was not a bad surgeon. He was a frightened one, though he'd never have used that word. And frightened men do not like mysteries walking their halls, because a mystery is a thing they cannot control. He heard the story on the fourth day, and he did not like it. "A nurse," he said to Priya, in the tone a man uses to make another man take something back. "You had a bleeder you couldn't control, and a nurse fixed it." She held pressure, Priya said carefully, because Priya was junior and wished to remain employed. And she suggested the clamp. "It was a team effort, sir." "It had better have been," Vane said, "because if I have a nurse practicing medicine on my floor, that's not a miracle. That's a lawsuit, that's a license, that's my name on an incident report." He straightened a paper on his desk that was already straight. "Find out who she is, quietly. I want to know exactly who I've got holding a needle in my trauma bay." So now there were two men in that hospital pulling on the thread of Quinn Marsh. One who had loved the hands he remembered, and one who feared them, and a woman down on the night shift who wanted only to be left alone, hanging her saline in the dark, answering the lights nobody else would answer. She felt it before she understood it. The way a room got quiet a beat too long when she walked in. The way Priya wouldn't quite meet her eyes now, half from awe and half from guilt. The way the day charge nurse mentioned, oh so casually, that the chief's office had been asking about staffing on nights. Quinn had survived long enough to know what a gathering storm felt like against her skin, and she began, quietly, to make the calculations she'd made before. Which shift to trade? How much notice to give? Which city was big enough next? It made her tired in a way sleep didn't touch. She was so tired of running the fence line, but she didn't know how to do anything else. So she did what she always did. She went to work, and she was no one, and she waited for the axe. It came for her on the seventh night, but not the way she expected. There was a new admit on the trauma floor, a young man off a motorcycle, road rash and a broken pelvis, and a long, ragged laceration up the inside of one arm that a resident had closed in the ER before sending him up. Quinn was doing her rounds, and she stopped to check his dressings, and when she lifted the gauze to look at the wound, she went cold all the way through. The laceration itself was nothing. It was the scar beside it that stopped her. An old scar healed years ago, running up the forearm, and stitched into that old scar, permanent as a fingerprint, was a whip stitch closure with a distinctive silver fine spacing and a locked terminal throw that she had put into human skin exactly one way in her whole life, because she'd invented it, on a bad night, out of necessity, and taught it to no one but the men and women of one small surgical team, a long way from home. "Where'd you get this scar?" she said, softly. The old voice, the real one. The kid blinked up at her, foggy on morphine. "Afghanistan, IED. Some doc sewed me up in the field. They medevaced me out." "Why?" Quinn's mouth had gone dry. "Do you remember the doc?" "Nah, woman, little. They said she stitched half the valley back together that year." He smiled, dreamy and far away. "My buddy Booker's got one too. Same doc, we think. We compare 'em. Twins." He laughed at his own joke and drifted off. Quinn stood there with the gauze in her hand and her own past looking up at her out of a stranger's arm. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the fence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a rope tightening. She had told herself she'd left no trail, but she hadn't left no trail. She'd left it in skin, in 100 forearms and thighs and shoulders scattered across a whole generation of men who had walked out of the worst day of their lives with her signature closed into their bodies. She had thought she could disappear, but you cannot disappear when your work is stitched into people who are still walking around thanking God for it. The trail was alive. The trail had a pulse, and now 2 of them were in her city, and one was 2 floors up dying with a colonel at his side, and the whole thing was closing on her like a hand. She finished her round. She charted, and at 4 in the morning she went out to the ambulance bay, where the air was cool and the city hummed, and she stood alone under the sodium lights and let herself, for 1 minute, feel all of it. She had never told anyone the real reason she'd quit. Not the discharge board, not the counselor they'd made her see, not her own sister. but standing there in the dark, with her breath fogging and her hands aching from the old cold that never fully left them, she said it to no one, out loud, because it had waited long enough. "I quit," she said, "because I could." Her voice cracked. I could keep going. That was the whole horror of it. I stood there in that room with the roof down and the two of them already gone, and I could still keep working. I could still tie the knots. My hands wouldn't stop. Everyone else was screaming or praying, and my hands just kept working. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I quit because I could. And it still wasn't enough. I still lost them. And I thought, if I can do that, if I can stand in the middle of the worst thing in the world and stay that calm, then something in me is already dead, and dead things shouldn't be allowed to hold the living. The bay was empty. The city didn't answer. But saying it out loud loosened something that had been locked in her chest for 7 years, and she stood there and breathed until the shaking stopped, and then she went back inside, because the lights were ringing and somebody had to answer them. She didn't know that the colonel's friend had passed that night. She didn't know that Halstead, unable to sleep, grieving, had walked the quiet halls in the small hours the way old soldiers do, and had come down 2 floors and had seen through a doorway a nurse changing a young man's arm dressing, and had watched her hands for exactly 4 seconds, and had known. He didn't approach her, not then. He was too old and too wise to corner a frightened animal in the dark. Instead, he did what a good commander does. He made a plan, and he made a call, and he set about giving her not an ambush but a door, one she could walk through on her own feet, if she chose, in the full light of day, surrounded not by strangers demanding answers, but by the only people on earth who already knew every one of them. The confrontation Quinn had braced for came 2 days later, and it was vain, and it was ugly, and it happened in the worst possible place, the middle of the floor, at shift change, with residents and nurses and a waiting room full of families all within earshot. He'd found something, a gap in her file, a licensing detail that didn't fully match, the kind of loose thread that a frightened man will pull because pulling it makes him feel large. "Ms. Marsh," he said the Ms., like a small insult. "A word, here is fine." She knew that tone. She'd heard men use it on women their whole careers. She set down her clipboard and folded her hands and became very still, and around them, the floor went quiet, the way the trauma bay had gone quiet. Everyone pretending not to listen, and no one able to stop. "There's a story going around about you," Vane said. "About you playing surgeon in my trauma bay, tying off vessels, directing my residents. I've got a chief resident who won't give me a straight answer, and a nurse with a file that has a very interesting little hole in it, right where a person's history ought to be." He let that sit, enjoying it. "So I'll ask you plainly, in front of your colleagues, so there's no confusion later. Who are you, and what exactly do you think you were doing putting your hands inside my patient?" It was designed to make her small, to make her stammer and apologize and shrink until she was easy to be rid of. And the old Quinn, the fence builder, wanted to do exactly that, to duck her head and murmur the kitchen line and offer her resignation quietly by morning and be gone before the axe fell. But she was so tired. And 2 floors up, a man had died in the night with his hand held. And in a bed down the hall, a young man wore her signature in his arm and called it a miracle. And somewhere in her chest, the thing she'd loosened out in the ambulance bay would not let her make herself small one more time. "I was keeping him from dying," she said. The floor went utterly silent. "Excuse me?" Vane said. "You asked what I was doing." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It had dropped into the register she'd worked so hard to bury, the flat, calm command voice of someone who has given orders over the sound of gunfire, and it carried down the whole hall without her spending an ounce of effort. Your resident had lost control of a deep vessel. Your patient was 90 seconds from arrest. I isolated the bleeder, I clamped it, and I tied it off, and your resident and your tech and I brought that man back. That is what I was doing. You're welcome." Vane's face had gone a mottled red. "A nurse does not." "You're right," Quinn said. "A nurse doesn't, but I wasn't a nurse when I learned to do it." And into the sharpest, most exposed second of the whole thing, With the words hanging in the air and every eye on her and Vane's mouth open to destroy her, came a voice from the end of the hall. An old voice, quiet, absolutely certain. Major Marsh. Not Ms., not the false name, the rank, her real rank, spoken the way it had been spoken to her 1,000 times in another life, and her whole body turned toward it before her mind caught up, spine straightening, chin coming up, the reflex of 15 years snapping into place, and she saw him. Colonel Halstead stood at the end of the corridor in a plain gray suit with a black armband on his sleeve for the friend he'd just buried, and his eyes were wet and shining, and he was smiling at her the way a father smiles, and behind him, filling the hallway, spilling out of the elevator, more of them coming, were men, a dozen of them, some in uniform, some in flannel and jeans, some with canes, one in a wheelchair, one missing an arm. Sergeant Reyes among them in his hospital gown, gripping his IV pole, grinning through tears. The young man from the motorcycle wheeled out in his bed, and behind them, a big quiet man Quinn had never met, who could only be Booker, rolling up his sleeve as he came, showing the whip-stitch scar to anyone who'd look, saying to no one and everyone, "That's her, that's the doc, that's her." They had come from all over. Halstead had made his calls, and the word had gone out on the old network that never truly goes quiet, the one that runs under everything. She's alive, she's here, she's the one. Come, and they had gotten in their trucks and onto planes, and they had come to San Antonio, to a level 1 trauma center on a Tuesday, to stand in a hallway and be counted. For her. Vane looked around at all of it, uncomprehending, a small man at the edge of something enormous he could not read. "What is this?" he said. "Who are these people?" Halstead didn't even look at him. He walked down the hall, slow, favoring one hip, and he stopped in front of Quinn, and he looked at her for a long moment, and everything that had gone unspoken for 7 years was in his old face. "I looked for you," he said. "After. I looked a long time. I wanted you to know it wasn't a waste. That night, the 2 you lost, Major, the roof came down on 9 men, and 7 of them are alive today, and every one of them is alive because you kept working when nobody on this earth would have blamed you for stopping." His voice thickened. "You didn't lose those 2 because something in you was dead. You held on to the 7 because everything in you was alive. There's a difference. I've waited 7 years to tell you the difference to your face." Quinn's careful stillness broke. It just broke, all at once, 7 years of it, and she put her hand over her mouth, and the tears came, and the hallway full of soldiers stood in silence and let her have it, because they were men who knew that some things a person has to be allowed to cry. Reyes shuffled forward on his IV pole. He reached into the pocket of his hospital gown and took something out and pressed it into her wet hand and closed her fingers over it, and when she opened them, she saw it was a coin, a unit challenge coin, worn smooth, the paint long rubbed off the raised design, warm from being carried against a body for years. "Passed around the whole unit, that coin," Reyes said hoarsely. "Anybody you sewed up, they carried it a while, then passed it on. Been carried for 7 years, ma'am, all over this country, waiting to find you. It's yours now. It was always yours." He closed her hand over it again. "You're not no one, Doc. You never were. We've been looking for you the whole time." Quinn stood in the middle of the trauma floor with a dead soldier's colonel weeping quietly in front of her, and a hallway of the living behind him, and a warm, worn coin in her fist, and she understood, finally, all the way down, the thing the fence had been built to keep out. It wasn't the questions. It was this. It was being seen. She had run for 7 years not because she feared their judgment, but because she feared their love. Because being loved for the very thing she'd condemned herself for was more than she'd known how to carry. She carried it now. She let herself carry it. She looked down at the coin, and she closed her hand around it, and she turned to Vane, who stood forgotten at the edge of it all, small and stunned, and beginning dimly to understand what he'd tried to crush. And she didn't gloat, because she was better than that, and always had been, even at her lowest, even hiding. "My name is Quinn Marsh," she said. "Major Quinn Marsh, formerly of a forward surgical team you'll never find on any roster you're cleared for. I'm a trauma surgeon. I stopped because I was tired, in a place rest doesn't reach, and I became a nurse because I still couldn't stand to leave a call light ringing." She held up the coin. "You wanted to know who put her hands in your patient. That's who. Now you know." And Vane closed his mouth and nodded once and stepped back and let the moment belong to the people it belonged to. I want to stop here for just a moment, before the last of it, because if this story has stayed with you the way it stayed with me, that means it found the soft place it was meant to find. These stories take a great deal of care to make. If you'd like more of them, you can subscribe to the channel, and it will help these quiet ones keep reaching the people who need them. Now, let me tell you how it ended. It did not end with Quinn Marsh sweeping back into surgery in a white coat. Life is rarely so tidy, and she was not a tidy woman. She kept her job on nights, for a while. She kept hanging the saline and answering the lights, because it turned out those were not small things, and she had never been running from them. But she let herself be seen. That was the change, and it was the whole change, and it was everything. She let Halstead take her to a long dinner where they talked until the restaurant closed, about the ones they'd lost and the ones they'd kept. She let Reyes and Booker and the young man from the motorcycle become, over the following months, a strange, gruff family that turned up on her days off to fix her fence. The literal one, the sagging cedar behind her rented house, and to eat everything in her kitchen, and to say her rank out loud in the daylight until she stopped flinching at it. And in time, when the hospital learned what it had, they made her a bridge. A trauma nurse who could scrub in when the worst came through the doors, who could stand at a resident's shoulder in the terrible 90 seconds and put her calm into their hands, who could teach a whole new generation of frightened young surgeons the knot she'd invented on the worst night of her life, the two-handed field tie thrown blind under load. She taught it in the light now, patiently, left hand guiding their right. Every one of them would carry it out into the dark someday. Every one of them would keep somebody alive with it, her signature going on and on. As for Vane, he never troubled her again. It was said around the hospital, much later, that the chief of surgery had quietly walked her credentialing straight through, and that he never once, for the rest of his tenure, called a nurse the kitchen anything again. Some men can't be made good, but they can be made ashamed, and sometimes that's enough to bend the road a little straighter behind them. She kept the coin in her scrub pocket. She reached for it sometimes on the hard nights and turned it over in her fingers, worn smooth by 7 years of hands that had carried it looking for her. And she came to understand that the whole time she'd spent making herself no one, she had never once been invisible. She had been written into people. She had been carried in pockets across a whole country. She had been, all along, the most seen person she knew. She'd only been too afraid to look up and find the eyes on her were kind. So if you take one thing from Quinn Marsh, take this. The quiet one at the edge of the room. The one everybody stopped noticing. The one you filed away under nothing. You have no idea what her hands have done in the dark. No idea what she's carried, or how far, or for whom. We see plain scrubs and a downcast face and decide we know the whole of a person, and we are so often so catastrophically wrong. Look again. Look kindly. The worth of a person was never on the cover, and the ones the world overlooks are so often the ones holding it all together with a knot nobody taught them, tied blind, under a weight you'll never see. Quinn worked the trauma floor for many years after that, and she answered every call light that ever rang for her, and she was never no one again. These stories are made with love. If this one stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. That is all I ask.